I think it's time to introduce our next speaker. Archie Mason is Osage and Cherokee, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather, who recently moved back to his hometown of Pawhuska. He had maintained residence there between Pawhuska and Tulsa, but now he's back in where he grew up in Pawhuska. He advocates both Osage and Cherokee culture, language, history, life, values, disciplines, customs, rituals, and family traditions. He's currently head committee man for the Gray Horse Elanchka Committee. He holds a Master's of Education from Northeastern Oklahoma State University and has completed postgraduate studies at the University of Tulsa. He's retired now from his education profession, and he also served on the Osage Congress for 14 years. So he has lots of experience and very familiar with our culture, of course. And so I'd like to introduce, and he's also my cousin. So very, very proud of him and all that he does for our tribe as well. So welcome, Archie. Thanks for your patience and hanging out with us. And we presented Archie with some questions. The topic today is growing up Osage. So, you know, Archie grew up there in Pawhuska. So we're going to let him take the list of questions that we presented. I think it will be more efficient if he just kind of goes through the questions, and he's already, I'm sure, put some thought into his answers. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I think probably best to keep our questions for the end of the presentation. And you can certainly send in questions via the chat as well. Thanks, Archie.
Hey, well, thank you for having me on today. I was asked by Carol to come and respond to some things, and wanted to begin first of all by saying that, you know, I have a lot of life experiences after 76 years. You tend to draw on a lot of past experiences and growing up. And I had some privileges. I need to share with you, first of all, what happened yesterday. My cousins and I, Archie Mason and Terry and Tammy, myself, we gathered along with some other people at the Gray Horse Cemetery, where there was a project that was going on to replace some vandalized photographs that were attached to gravestones. One of them was John Mason, was my uncle, my grandfather's brother. And his picture was able to be, again, attached, a new picture attached to the gravestone. We were there just to watch the event and watch it be placed back where it once was, and certainly a memory. But as we walked around the cemetery there at Gray Horse, you know, I'm among family there. All my families, my father's side and some on my mother's side are in Gray Horse in that cemetery. And with that, I was thinking about today and what Carol had asked me to respond to, and saying growing up. Now I'll begin by saying my birth town is in Ponca City, Oklahoma. I grew up in Pawhuska. I consider Pawhuska my hometown, but I spent 40 plus years in Tulsa with the school system and have since removed and relocated myself back into my hometown in Pawhuska. I enjoyed virtually every place I've been and every year that I've spent here on the earth. And especially those early formative years as a child growing up in Pawhuska and at Gray Horse and in Fairfax in company of mother and father and grandmother and grandfather and aunts and uncles, and hearing the Osage language. Every time I went over there, I mean, that's all I heard. I was addressed that. My grandma and grandpa talked to me Osage, and me and the cousins, we'd all respond and do what we just did. We grew up with that in the early days. And then we'd have to change in a hurry by the time we got back to school on Monday, because we wouldn't hear it at school. We'd hear English. All the rest of the week be English. friends and everybody we'd play with, our school, out on the playground, so forth, was all English. And weekends, Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays, again, I had a great deal of pleasure in hearing our language, being able to hear and do things in another language as instructed or asked to do this or asked to do that, or sometimes just told to do this and told to do that. And we'd go and do it as kids. We just do that. There wasn't any arguments or anything. We did what was asked of us. That's part of our culture back in the day. So we had to respect our elders who told us to do these things, and in so doing, they taught us things in the way that we grew up, taking us all the way up through our daily routines on the weekends, in and around the farmhouse there north of Fairfax, out at Gray Horse, and in town in Fairfax, because Grandma and Grandpa had 3 houses there. Grew up and didn't know which one I'd show up in, but we'd show up in one of them and enjoy it. And then along with that come June. And back in the day, I remember as a child, we'd dance in the spring and we'd also dance in the fall, way back there. And that was in the old roundhouse where I was brought in and got roached in the old roundhouse before it burned down in the 60s. I was took in there in the early 50s, I guess, and taken in and got my roach, began dancing back in that day, that era. And it's been there ever since, every year. And still doing it today. And hopefully this year, if not, next year we'll continue on. But going back to growing up and trying to condense a lot of things in a short amount of time, I think we're at the tail end of your meeting. Perhaps the old school teacher in me is, I just want to talk so much, then I'll be quiet and let we get into the Q&A, and that we get a lot of things shared at that time. But I did grow up in and around a whole environment of Indian boys and Indian girls growing up in Pawhuska. Went to Catholic school and went to public school, junior high, because we didn't have upper grades in Catholic school, just up to the 5th grade or 6th, I forgot. 6th grade, I think. I went to junior high and then high school in Pawhuska. I attended 1 year at St. Gregory's High School in Shawnee, a boarding school, my junior year in high school. Finished up Pawhuska High School, went on into Northeastern and Tahlequah. Got exposure to another whole culture over there among the Cherokee people. Found relations and kinfolks over there. And after that, a whole lot of things happened. And it was during that time that something we call Vietnam happened while I was in college. And that whole time and era changed a whole lot of my experiences. Although I did not go to Vietnam, nor was I ever drafted into that war, in that conflict. Many of my friends and family were. My Ponca brother was killed over there. He's buried and got his name on the wall there in DC, and buried at Fort Gibson. And many of my friends in college, that whole experience was something that changed the way we thought, the way we lived from week to week, because we didn't know whether we was going to get drafted or called up, whether we was Indian or not. Didn't make any difference. You got your letter, you went, and there was no question. So that was right in the middle of the college experience. But I made it through, and then after that, got into experience in Tulsa public schools and stayed there. And got involved with Indian education in the Tulsa public schools, was there for 30-some years in that capacity as a staffer and as administrative director, and where one time we were the second largest Indian education program in the United States of America, next to LA. And that was in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We had a lot of Indian students, a lot of families there in the 60s and the 70s. And I was there part of it, along with being involved in the Indian community, Indian world, you might say, in Oklahoma, the intertribal world. Got involved in many powwows, many events, many ceremonies, many tribes, and got to know a lot of people around Oklahoma. Was pleased to do that. But going back to all of that was part of that was because of an experience I had with grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles, who they too had experiences as young people, growing up in an era of affluence back in the day when the oil money was in, and they remembered their grandparents who had none. And they came in from Kansas, and that was that whole group of Osages that had $0, and that was a whole new another group of our ancestors, our relations, that to me wasn't that many generations ago from my generation. I heard about it. And as I sit here today, and I know some of you are grandparents, and you share things of the past with your children and grandchildren. And just as I was as a child, when grandma and grandpa told me something, that was truth. That was pretty much the truth. So they never lied to me, but they told me things. And you listen to them, whether there was stories or what, but they were real stories, and they were truthful stories, and they were about our people and about their people, and it ended up being our people. And those kind of things are still in my head that I'm sharing as a grandparent with my kids and my grandchildren, and now my great grandchildren. And that's what we do in this oral history that we have. I know our other presenters and where we are today in the the world that we have today in the Osage is that we have this knowledge for holding on to who we are and what we are and how we do that. And today, how we do it is much different than the way I learned it. And there are a few others of my generation and this age group and before there are a few that are older than I, that we remember how we learned. And we didn't have TV. We didn't have television. We didn't have the internet. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have we didn't have these things. We had grandma and grandpas, and we had this language that we heard and listened to, and that's where I came from, and that's where I am today. And along with some others, I too am challenged by the lithography and the orthography that's here today. Young people handle it really well, and they do that, and they're learning that. They're learning this about us through this new system. And I almost pat myself on the back because this is about the second time I've ever done Zoom on my own. So this is about as high tech as I can get. So when we talk about other things, I'm pretty much old school, and if you have questions, just call me on the phone. I'll talk to you. So we do it like that. I don't know these other ways and thing, but Cousin Carol asked me to share a few things with you, and I'm just hitting the very high points of my experiences. One individual, other people have other experiences, maybe similar, maybe quite different, depend on where you were. But I was able to be raised in Osage County, in and around Alcalcoli and Gonzoli and Pasoli peoples, and our dances around there, and all over how we're related to one another, various clans or clan relationships or band relationships and all of these kinds of things. And how it seemed like wherever I went, I had cousins. I had all kinds of people we related to. And that was a little bit about it. But I'll move on forward to another area that Cousin Carol asked me to do, and that would be the culture of things. And the culture, as I recall, and I have many people before me shared that, we like to hold on to things, and it's been said many times, you don't want to change things, you don't want to add things, you don't want to take away anything, and just leave it as it is. Don't change it. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that in history and in time. Time has a way of changing things and altering things as we are using these things today. this electronic and social media today has altered and changed the way we learn and teach and share. And that's the way it is today. And I know that. And things that we do culturally speaking in and around our Iloshka, in and around our other ceremonies and events that we hold very dear to us, we try to hold on to as much as we can and not change it as much as we can. Although I've seen it change in these decades that I've been around it, it has changed. And it will change in the next 100 years. I don't know how, but it will. And I hope that the young people that have it today, that are learning it today, and our children and our grandchildren that's going to be in it, will take what we tell them as grandparents. This is how I learned it. This is how I hope and wish that you do it, because that's all they told us. You do it this way. And we didn't really ask why. They just told it. You do it this way. You do it this way. You dress this way. You talk this way. You respect this way. You have these kinds of foods. You cook these kinds of foods. You do it this way. And that's just the way they said it. You do it this way. That's the way the old people would tell us. And like I said, we just grew up with that. We just did it. And I think today, as we try to do that, we try to do the same thing. However, today, there's so many other things that are around and surround our young people, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. They have so many other distractions, if you will, other than just my word and my stories. And I know that that's a challenge for me and as well as them to understand how and what we are and how we're going to be in 50 years. I don't know. I know how we can be today, and I see why and how we are going to be tomorrow. Because of what we do today. What we did yesterday it has that influence on how we are today. And that's how I am today, because what I was yesterday. But what is tomorrow is what the young people have today. And so that was the next era that another point that sister, or I call her sister, cousin, she's Sister Carol, has said, address these things too. What do you see about our Osage people tomorrow, in the future? Well, the future's here today. I think you heard Selena and the young people. That is the future. Those are the young people talking about subject matter and electronic means that I have no idea what she was talking about. But there are so many people today who do know that. That is their world. That is the life of the Osage today. That is the electronic Osage today. That is the social media Osage of today. That was not what I was. I'm trying to hold on to that ship. Feel like I'm on the caboose of a train that's moving very fast. But at least I'm on the train. So I want to hold on to it as long as I can, and go for a ride and see where we go. And with that said, how do we do this? How do we connect? And we're doing that now, whether you're in Southern California, Northern California. I have grandchildren and daughters up in Wisconsin. We got Osages all over the place, and in Germany. And we're doing it today on the internet. We're doing it today. And so that's how we as Osages are connecting. We're not using smoke signals like we did. We're not running on foot anymore. We're not jumping in a car and going and no longer I like to think that we can still go and take a message, take that basket of groceries and gifts to somebody's door, knock on the door and present them a gift and say, I have something I need to share with you. And they accept that gift, then you can talk, because that's something you want to ask them. But you do so in that way. We don't do that today. We're doing it like we're doing now. You asked me to do something. I'm trying to share some things with you on this social media platform, and it is what it is today. So there's not that expression, that's not that feeling of a gift that I can give you or you give me or we exchange, that touchy feeling kind of thing that I think Indians like, especially Osages. I miss that part because of the COVID that we don't have that now. But we do have this, and we'll hold on to this. We'll hold on to the things that have been said and presented today. You will hold on to it because of the things that have been said, and the presenters who have shared their expertise with you today, and knowledge, and hearing the language and the prayer from Brother Van. All of these things, that's the Osages today. So you're not that distant from us, nor us in Pawhuska are distant from you. We can get on this thing and see you 24/7 today. See your face and hear your voice. And I'm just encouraging that we're able to do that today. It's an interesting thing, because I remember the old telephone on the wall that Grandma and Grandpa had. It was a crank the phone, you crank it, you listen, it's party line. That was quite an interesting, fun thing. And it was a really, they thought at the time, that was the modern day time for them in their home in Fairfax. So, and then we progressed and we had a rotary dial phone. We got away from just calling up the operator and say, "What number, please?" I said, "Number 703, and they dial it and we talk. But nowadays we have cell phone, we have phones on our wristwatch. We can wear that. So that sounds like Dick Tracy in the old days. It's real. So with that said, I'm covering a whole lot of things and feel like I'm kind of shotgunned around today, but at this time of day, I don't know what our block of time left is, but if there's some questions or any of you out there want to ask me anything, please do. I don't know if I have anything.
Carol Bennett. Hi, Carol. She's raising her hand. Go ahead with your question.
Carol?
Yes, I would like you to tell me about 2 foods that your grandmother made when you were a little boy that were your favorites, and tell me about them.
I liked her Indian corn, because they would grow their own corn and harvest it, dry it, and Grandma would make the best Indian corn soup. I liked that. And next was her fry bread, but most of all was Grandma's meat pies. Man, she made the best meat pies, and that was my favorites.
What was her secret for the meat pie?
What was her secret?
Yeah.
Kidney soot. She liked that kidney.
Right. Yeah.
She liked that kidney soot in it.
Did she put beans in your corn soup or just corn?
Just corn.
Okay.
Corn and some meat, and threw some potatoes in there once in a while, some new potatoes or wild potatoes.
Thank you, Uncle.
Good question.
Yeah, it makes me hungry.
I see people on Facebook posting pictures of their meat pies, and I'm always so jealous, just, wish we could get one. Chuck's a good cook. Chuck knows how to make some good.
Yeah, I know Chuck. He's got that rep. Well, how many boys know how to cook?
Yeah, my grandma maker, she was knew how to do it.
I wonder if Archie would tell us some story he remembers. Are there any stories you remember?
Well, I got all kind of stories. I'm a grandpa. I'm full of stories. You don't want to get me started, because I'll be here for a long time. But I have to tell you a story that was a true life story. A long time ago, my dad and his brothers living there north of Fairfax. They were staying at the farmhouse north. Great-grandfather lived out on those. There was a little creek that come by, and there was some flat rocks there. And he actually had a teepee, and he was staying in that teepee, and he was almost 90 years old. And one evening, this was way back, and my dad said he was just a child then. He was the oldest of Joe and Clem. He was the oldest of those 2 brothers. So they watched this group of old men show up, and they were having a meeting in that teepee that night. this is a true story. He told me. So he was there. And as little boys, they were teepee peepers. So they had to go see what was going on. So they went over there that night, and they heard a language in there. And these men were in there all night long. They were singing and talking and all of that. And after the night was done, it's getting to be sunlight. And the boy said, we woke up, we went back over there. And he said, as the sun rays came through the front of that teepee, as it was facing the east, sun rays were coming in like rays of sun, and there was smoky in there. He said those old men were taking off their blankets and hanging them on those sun rays in that teepee. So I saw that. They were hanging articles on these sun rays in the air. And then they said, when it was all over and they left, they asked their dad, says, what was that you men were speaking last night? We didn't understand that, even though that's all they spoke was Osage. And Grandpa said, we were talking old Osage. And that was those old guys from Kansas, those guys. So there was another language, another way of speaking Osage. He said, we were talking old Osage. That's my story.
That's a good one.
Paul has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Archie, Congressman. I really appreciate your taking the time and sharing your stories with us. You just don't know how much I appreciate it. And when I've heard you pray at our other meetings, it's just so moving. I just appreciate that. But my father was raised in Pawhuska like you were, quite, before you, maybe 20 years, and I'm not that far behind you. Of course, I wasn't raised in Pawhuska. I was raised in the Tulsa area. But my father never spoke about his childhood. I had questions as an adult. He died when I was 39, and I could have asked him some questions, but he didn't mention it. He didn't discuss his childhood. And I just didn't feel comfortable asking him. And I don't know why that is. He was born in 23. So he grew up there in Pawhuska, went to Pawhuska High School, played in the band, was in the Boy Scouts. And of course, we're known for the first Boy Scout troops in the United States. But so I don't know if that's just an Osage thing, that he's just quiet about his youth and his growing up. Maybe not. But I also would like to know how Osages like yourself that grew up knowing the language and in the culture, how you were seen by the non-Osages growing up. I guess it's a racism question. Did you feel any racism as being Osage, or did the white folks or the non-Osages, let me say that, the non-Osages, did they feel maybe a minority? How did the Osages and the non-Osages get along when you were growing up in Pawhuska? Thank you.
Well, as a child, I grew up with a lot of non-Osage kids, and just the nature of the neighborhood and the community. And we played alongside each other as children. And even at the Catholic school, we were mixed. So we not only went to school and sat in the same classrooms together and went to mass together and served mass together and went to communion, did all of these things together, as did our parents. I think then as well as today, not only in Pawhuska, but still in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I've sensed that as I worked in both and grew up in Pawhuska, that there's still that underlying undertow of differences of feelings, if you will. And that as a child, I didn't really sense it so much as I did when I got into the upper grades at school and realized that, yeah, there were some things that events, if you will, social cliques that developed that were Osage and others that were non-Osage. And I never thought of it because when we did our dances out there, it was like the community said, well, that's the Indians out there dancing. And yeah, that's me. So what? You know, I'm gonna go dance. And I didn't care what they thought. And then whenever there's hand games or things, the other community, of course, they weren't invited. It was a closed thing that we did among ourselves back in that day, and we still do it today. It's closed. I mean, that's the way we are. I mean, those are belong to us. But when you get across the Boundary Street and say 15th, and you get back into Pawhuska proper, things changed. And I think in the era and the time, and my dad was born in 1910, my mother in 1916. My mother grew up Fairfax and in Pawhuska. She graduated from Pawhuska. But I remember stories about, and these again are stories of that time, perhaps when your dad was there, and maybe those are earlier than he, where there was a very much a difference of feeling, if you would, between the white folks and the Osages back in that day. And we've got a lot of history behind that. And we've got a lot of, again, feelings. But to answer your question, I don't know why. Now, my mother shared with me some things that, not a whole lot. I mean, a lot of it wasn't my business. That was her business as a young woman, a young child, as a student. Same way with my dad. He used to tell me, some stories about what they used to do at Fairfax, he and his brothers and the others that I knew of. And they were just, they were young teens and they did things, but it wasn't necessarily, and it was all among the Osages. That whole group, they all ran with the Osages. And that's what he shared with me. So that was I didn't hear anything else from him about in that Fairfax area, but it was just the Osages. Now Pawhuska was a different, there wasn't that openness and sharing. And maybe that's the same that you experienced. My mother just didn't share a whole lot with her experiences there in Pawhuska as a young person. Whether they were good experiences or bad experience, I don't know. That was not shared with me. So I don't know.
I just was thinking that maybe that was kind of an Osage thing, of just staying kind of private in so many ways. I think, or my dad, or, you know, because I didn't think my dad was weird or recluse in any other way. I'm thinking that was just maybe the way he was raised, like you were raised, in this kind of family and close knit, and some things you just kept private.
To us. Yeah. You know, my life and my Osage, being an Osage boy over there, was exactly that. And my parents were Osage, my grandparents were Osage, and my friends were Osages, and a few were not. But the rest of it, my life was exactly that. And I didn't share it with. You know, I didn't have to. It was a shared experience with others. And maybe that's the way it was. Maybe that was the same for them.
I'd like to chime in here just a little bit because I'm older than you, Archie. And I grew up in Ponca City. And I remember signs in stores saying no Indians. And I remember on the streets of Ponca City when Indians still wore blankets. Yep. And I'm a tinker. But my grandmother Tinker was married to a white man, and there were some tensions certainly in Ponca City, which had a colored drinking fountain. And so I sensed it as a girl that there was something, quote, wrong with being an Indian and to not tell people I was Osage.
Well, there was that too. And there was the part that, you know, if you wanted to go buy a car in Ponca City or Bartlesville or somewhere, you didn't tell them that because they'd raise the price on you. You had the Osage price. And that's still today. Amen. You're right.
Other questions?
I have
I'd
some
I'd like
really
to chime in a
personal
little
ones.
something about that, if I might. You know, I grew up in Hominy, and when I was young, we would go to Ponca City, and Ponca City was different.
Yeah.
It was, you know, the Ponca people got really treated poorly.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
kind of thing wouldn't fly in Osage country. Uh-uh. So yeah, that I agree with you. It was like that over there, but it wasn't like that in Osage County.
And there's still things I'm sure I follow a lot of pages, you know, from Oklahoma, from the area, and I see different comments about racism and Skytook and, you know, this and that from other family members, some young people that say there's a lot of that still going on in different communities. So I'm sure that's there, just like it is all over the US. We're finding out now a lot of that going on, but yeah, Archie doesn't, you know, dwell on those things. I know he's, you know, just keeps moving forward, but having that life experience going up there, I'm sure was very different than I experienced here in California.
Well, I think we all have the blessings and the privileges of life, and we all have different experiences. And here we are today, each and every one of us, and we're breathing. And above all, to have a breath of life this morning, in whatever capacities that we have this evening and this afternoon, to me is a blessing. And to have the privilege to hear one another, if it's not just for an hour or 2 hours or so, this indeed is a privilege. It is to me to hear you and see you and to say, you guys are the only Osages I've seen today. I mean, I'm here at the house. COVID keeps me in the house, so you guys are it.
Mr. Archie, I have a question.
I'm privileged.
Go ahead.
I don't know. Thanks, Carol. My Eco went to the school for Osage girls, the Catholic school,
Yeah.
and she didn't tell me much about it. She told me one thing about it like years later in the older part of school, but it wasn't, I never got a sense of what it was like to go there. And I wonder what you remember from.
My mother went to school at St. Louis boarding school as a child, and her sisters, and a lot of Osage girls did. My aunts did, and Carol's grandma, I think, maybe went there. I don't know, back there. My mother said she remembers one time the nuns had to take all of the girls and take them down to the basement and hide them because there were horse riders in white sheets that were riding around the school at Pawhuska. True story.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
I want to share one other story. My sister worked in environmental remediation, and they had a project at Haskell Indian School. And one of the things they found there was a box full of tiny handcuffs that they used to chain the kids to the beds at night so they wouldn't run away.
Yeah, it was not good.
Yeah.
Like I said, there a lot of our ancestors had experiences that they didn't share with us. They were just evidence of something bad. I visited Carlisle Indian School where today, it was a couple years ago, but I had to go see Carlisle. And I saw names that were there, some familiar names from the Poncas and the Osages, and people that some family names of those that I remember their names. But back in the back, one of the structures that was still left, and the guide, not knowing I was a native person, he was saying, this was the ammo. It was a small building. He said, we kept the ammunition in here, but we also, the Indian students who were punished because of speaking their language were put in this building and locked up. And then went to the cemetery, and you see all of these little baby graves, little children's graves in that cemetery at Carlisle of all of the Indian kids that died there. And I I had to leave. I told my wife, I said, let's get out of here. I can't, you know, this is really hard to be here. And I cannot imagine just for those children back there who had to be there with no choice. I mean, they had no choice. They were incarcerated. They were there. And a lot of them were our ancestors. That's another story. So.
I was going to mention my grandmother spent 1 year at Carlisle, and she was telling me that when she arrived, she was quite young, and then she came back to the boarding schools in Oklahoma. But she said when she first got there, you know, her mother had taught her to tell the truth. So they come and say to, who spoke Indian? And she goes, I did. And of course they spank her. And she mentioned being chained to the bed for speaking Indian too.
Yeah, that happened to a lot of Indians, not just Osages, but a lot of Indians. There's a lot of stories among our peoples over the years. And like I said, today, here we are today. And we have some freedom, and we have this freedom to see one another and say and talk like this on the internet and share these stories. And they're real, true stories. There's not any lies that have been shared today. There's not one lie that I've heard, and nor have I said, and nor have you said. So it's all been a truthful afternoon. And that's the one thing that we Indians kind of take pride. We're a truthful people, and Osages. We've been taught, you know, we speak the truth. We have to tell it the truth, and especially we as grandparents. We damn sure better tell the truth, because who else is going to do it but us? Amen.
I didn't mean to bring up such a dark subject, and so I apologize for that. But I work with Osages, being on the Mineral Council, and I have to say that I work with some of the most educated, talented people in pride. And it gives me pride to work with these people. And I'm talking like people like Tolly Redcorn and Myron Red Eagle. I noticed that one of his nieces is on here. Yes, and we are smart people, just as smart, if not smarter than others, than most. And I'm just so proud to be Osage. My children, and I have great-grandchildren. I have 3 great-grandchildren. 2 of the 3 great-grandchildren are old enough to know about their heritage. And there's a certain amount of pride that we feel being a part of the Osage people. And I just want to say that even though these Northern California and Southern Californian Osages they don't have the opportunity to be in Pawhuska or to Fairfax or Gray Horse, Hominy, these areas that we're talking about today, but surely they feel it. I bet they feel it. And they are as much Osage as we are, in my mind. And it's wonderful for you to share this with them and with me. And I'm a Tulsa boy. And I just feel so pride and so privileged to be in this conversation with all of you. The pride is just flowing out of me. Thank you very much.
It's been a good day.
Thank you, Archie. I know everybody enjoyed your presentation. Just a great way to end our meeting, our virtual meeting. So thank you for your time. And I think we're going to have some other announcements probably before we sign off from Amy or Karen.